Well, good morning, folks. I know there's a few folks who are still going to join us throughout the morning, but we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us this morning for our integrated planning and budget webinar. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that we are going to record this session to make it available on our website for future reference, as well as a resource for those who are not able to attend this morning. So Karin, just a quick double check. Are we recording already?
We sure are.
Perfect. Wonderful. So again, welcome to this integrated planning and budget webinar.
Lots of people there.
Excited to be here with you. Just a quick reminder.
Oh, did you get your
mind
bargaining
double
chief?
checking that you are muted? That would be really helpful as we move through.
Oh,
Apologies, I got muted there for a second as I was asking folks to mute. So again, welcome to the Integrated Planning and Budget webinar. We're excited to be with you this morning. My name is Cassie Medina. I'm the Director of Grant Management and Monitoring here in the Office of Education, Innovation, and Improvement at ODE. I have a fantastic team here with me today, both presenting and providing support via chat. I'm going to allow folks to introduce themselves as they speak. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the chat. We have a whole team of folks at the ready to draft responses to flag questions that are helpful to answer out loud. We also will have about 15 minutes or so at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. So don't be shy about your questions. Feel free to pop them in the chat, or when we get to the end of the presentation, you'll have opportunity at that time as well. I want to take a couple of minutes this morning to provide a little bit of background and context. Back in February of 2022, our office, EII, released what we refer to as the integrated guidance. With the goal of aligning for student success, we operationally integrated 6 ODE initiatives. That's going to be high school success, everyday matters, early indicator and intervention systems, the student investment account, continuous improvement planning, and CTE through Perkins 5. Along with the release of the integrated guidance, we launched a web page to provide supplemental resources along the way. I'm going to ask my colleagues to link both the integrated guidance and the web page in the chat. I would really encourage you to bookmark these links as they provide resources you might find helpful along the way. While the integrated guidance covers a vast array of topics, ranging from planning steps and processes to coaching and available supports, today we're going to focus our efforts on section 3, which is financial stewardship. Again, I'm going to ask my colleagues to post in the chat section 3 on financial stewardship. We have a few goals for our time together this morning. Throughout the presentation, we'll walk through braiding and blending of funds, tiered planning. We're going to look at CTE regional consortia, budgeting, available resources, including a sample budget that we've developed. And again, leaving some room at the end for some questions. As I mentioned, the integrated guidance goes in great detail, goes through the various steps in the planning process. Those steps include intentional and authentic engagement with the community, with students and their families, with staff, and others. It includes the process of assessing needs and identifying priorities. We identified 12 distinct steps in the planning process, each of them important and leading to the submission of an integrated plan. The point at which actually completing the budget template is step 9. That means that schools and districts have gone through robust planning efforts before identifying how to invest the funds from each initiative. However, that does not mean that business offices or business managers should not be involved prior to step 9. During the spring, our team traveled around the state to all 19 ESDs and offered sessions to help folks map onto the integrated guidance and begin calendaring out how to move through each step of the planning process. During those sessions, we encouraged superintendents and school leaders to ensure they were engaging with their business offices early and often throughout the planning process So folks understood the intended outcomes and strategies that individual investments are connected to. During the summer, Tori and I had the opportunity to present at the OASBO Summer Conference, where we encouraged business officers to look for the opportunities to engage in the planning process before budgeting needs to occur. And once again, we're encouraging folks to get involved early and often. As you know, financial stewardship is not just about completing the budget. It goes beyond that. It requires deep understanding and commitment to the outcomes and the strategies the investments are tied to. We're all part of the puzzle. And without one piece, the puzzle's incomplete. And so really leaning into the fact that your voice matters, your commitment matters, and your expertise matters in this entire planning process. So as we lead into preparing to budget, it's important to understand how we have identified and defined outcomes, strategies, and activities. We're going to use that language a lot. You're going to see that on the template, on the resources and the samples that we've offered. And so it's important to understand how those different terms are defined. Outcomes are those changes in health, behavior, actions, attitudes, or policies that impact students, educators, people, groups, and organizations with whom your work is in relationship. All of these definitions are in the integrated guidance as well. Those are going to be our outcomes, while our strategies support long-term outcomes. They describe the approach that you're planning to take. So understanding the overall outcome, what's the intended goal, what's the strategy that we're going to take, sets us up to really be able to identify the individual activities or concrete plans, actions, or investments that are oriented to smaller steps or shorter timeframes within the arc of a given strategy or set of strategies. Activities are those individual investments that are connected to specific strategies and intended outcomes. By first identifying the outcomes, strategies, and activities, we can ask the question, here's what we want to do. Now, how are we going to finance it? Then we begin to budget the activities. You may not have the funding to finance each activity all in 1 year, but this can help you build out your 4-year plan with a tiered approach that we'll talk about a little bit more as we go through the presentation this morning. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Tori and let her kind of lead us into the next section of this presentation.
Great, thanks, Cassie. So I'm Tori Higgins. I'm also on the grants management and monitoring team. I want to jump into talking about grading and blending of funds. So this is a concept that's mentioned often in the integrated guidance, but it's not new to many districts, and it may already be happening very organically across your funding streams. But by integrating these 6 programs into one integrated and planning budget, we are hoping to offer the opportunity to streamline your process of braiding and blending funds. So the starting point to successfully braid and blend funds is to have that well-informed plan with clear outcomes and strategies, as Cassie mentioned. So your community engagement is tying directly into the development of your plan. And then this plan can be implemented by developing activities that then you can match allowable funding sources to. So really, this is asking grantees to kind of change the narrative on some past budgeting practices. Instead of approaching plans with allocation amounts and then budgeting until there's no more funds left to budget, we're asking grantees to first identify their outcomes and strategies and then consider how their allocation will support those individual activities. This is really going to require that deeper connection and communication between program and finance staff, just within districts across the state. And next slide. With this endeavor in mind, we developed a table, and it's on page 52 of the integrated guidance, of previously utilized activities and strategies that could have been funded from a variety of sources, but were often only funded by one source. So unfortunately, when we see this silo of programs, this can really limit the impact of grant funds and unfortunately limit the positive impacts that are felt by students. So if you look at just this top example here, you might have previously funded this strategy with only SIA funds. But now we can see that an integrated model of mental health is an allowable use under all 4 of these programs. So you might not have enough allocation from a single fund, say EIIS or Perkins, but to fund all the activities that you want. However, you could braid and blend in some of your SIA funds, some of your high school success funds that can really complement these different activities to support mental and behavioral health. And then this in turn is going to free up other funding sources that might be for more specific or restricted allowable uses. And Appendix H of the integrated guidance really goes into extensive detail about allowable uses for each of these funding streams. And I'm going to pass it off to Bria.
Hi, I'm Bria Cardiel. I am on the high school success team, but I'm also a district grant manager. I get to talk to you about tiered planning. Tiered planning refers to your approach to proactively anticipating and considering modifications to your planned activities and expenditures. Tiered planning opens the door to planning for future years down the road, which can alleviate administrative burden if the initial budgeting plan becomes disrupted. These might be as a result of workforce shortages or other scenarios where initial plans and priorities may require adjustment. ODE will accept tiered plans that accommodate for these variables by adjusting the strategies, activities, and expenditures. This is one of the best approaches to avoid having to make significant plan amendments within a year or biennium, as it takes into account the important process requirements in planning, while offering some flexibility based on changing conditions. Tiered planning is a 2-pronged approach, using either bonus activities or alternative activities. Bonus activities are what would be great to have in addition, and alternative activities are in the event that you can't implement your first choice. An example of a bonus activity could be if you remove an activity because you choose instead to pay for it with ESSER funding. Then funds would be freed up in the integrated plan that could be used towards other additional activities. On the other hand, an alternative activity might be if you can't hire a mental health counselor, you might remove that activity and replace it with another pre-approved activity that can be paid for with the same funding stream. Here is another consideration, continuing to support the identified focal populations. All tiered planning activities are community-informed alternatives, but also anticipate roadblocks ahead of time. For example, if hiring a mental health counselor will be difficult, add in alternative activities to tiered planning that address the same need. We recommend brainstorming a few alternatives for each strategy. One last important consideration surrounds meeting statutory requirements. If, for example, an activity that uses high school success funding is no longer available to be completed and needs to be replaced with another activity, you should work with the ODE team to ensure that, that the replacement activity, while already approved within the larger scope of the investment, still meets high school success spending requirements set by statute. And I will pass it on.
Thank you, Bria. My name is Ronald Gardner. I am with the post-secondary transition team within the Department of Education, which also houses the CTE team. The focus of the integrated guidance effort is to bring together the various programs in a guided conversation and focused intentionality, specifically for the 10 school districts who are direct Perkins grant recipients. Your Perkins grant is now all-inclusive within the integrated guidance approach. The effort of the integrated planning budget template is to pull together the funding sources that will focus in on the outcomes, strategies, and activities that Tori had referenced earlier. As you get into the specific budgeting items, as you start to list them to meet the Perkins requirement, you feel free to ask for additional lines if you need to add them to the worksheet accordingly to meet the requirements. If your school system is part of a career technical education consortium, you need to work with your CTE regional coordinator. Additionally, you may want to work with your regional coordinator and the consortium handbook as to how the decisions and processes come together. Additionally, the Department of Education has a CTE policy handbook, which gives some additional guidance specific to the Perkins parameters. Feel free to reach out anytime to myself, who is the fiscal person within the Perkins team, to ask questions as it relates to your integrated guidance aligning for student success approach. We'll now hand it off to Kim.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Kohler. I am a district grant manager on the grants management and monitoring team. Great to see some familiar faces and names here today. I get the pleasure of walking you through the actual template itself, the integrated planning and budget template. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to drop into the chat the updated integrated planning and budget template. This is version 2 of the template, so it's slightly modified from the original version that was linked into the integrated guidance, but you'll still be able to access this version if you are in the integrated guidance. So if you click on the link in the integrated guidance, it will take you to version 2, so no worries there. There's also an updated technical guide that is linked as well within the integrated planning and budget template on the planning tab. So that will walk you through each step of the different tabs within the template, how to fill it out, hopefully help you answer any like straightforward technical questions you might have about using the template itself. We also want to highlight that there has been a new tab that's been added. I hope you will all be really happy with the new tab. It's called Start Here. You may have seen it before in some of our other templates. There's a drop-down menu in that Start Here tab where you can select your institution, and then your allocations for each program on the budget tabs will be automatically populated. So that's for both 23-24 and 24-25 of the budget tabs. So then you'll be able to kind of see what remains in terms of your allocation as you go about budgeting out your activities. I do want to make a note about charter schools. You may be a district that has charters within your district, or you may be a charter school that's attending this webinar from the business office wondering about like, where do I fit in here? So on page 120 and 121 of the integrated guidance, you have the charter school table where you have the different charter scenarios. If you are an independent charter or a virtual charter, you're going to be completing both the application and the integrated planning and budget template just as if you were a district. So you'll have your full application and you'll have your integrated and planning and budget template that you'll submit along with your application. If you are a district sponsored charter or a partially administered charter, so that's scenarios 2 and 3 in the charter table, in the charter scenarios, you will submit your own integrated planning and budget template, even though you're applying along with your district. So if it is a district that has, let's say, 3 charters that are partially administered, ODE is going to expect to see 4 integrated planning and budget templates submitted with the application. That would include the district integrated planning and budget template, and then 3 integrated planning and budget templates for each of the partially administered charters within the district. And then the last charter is the fully administered charter. For fully administered charters, you will not submit a separate integrated planning and budget template. Instead, your activities will be embedded within the district integrated planning and budget template as activity line items within the template. Next slide. Next slide. So moving into the sample itself, I'm going to ask our team to drop a link into the chat. This is a sample integrated planning and budget template that we've developed for you to reference and take a look at and see some examples. We developed this sample as if it were like a medium-sized district with medium-sized allocations populated onto the budget tabs. I want to call your attention first to the scenario tab, which really speaks to and illustrates the advantages of having that open lines of communication between your business finance office and your planning teams, and shows how the community engagement, needs assessment, equity lens, all leads to producing the information on this template in the form of the outcomes, strategies, and activities. How those priorities really come to life into this template. So here on the planning tab is where you'll list those outcomes and their associated strategies. And I want to call your attention to the strategy numbering schema on the left-hand side column, where you can see, like, if you have outcome A, the strategies associated with outcome A will be listed as A1, A2, A3. This is really important as we moved into the budget tabs, as you'll see when we move on to the next tabs. But before we do that, I want to also show you then the right-hand columns where you can see the programs listed. You'll see X's in the sample on this tab, where you can see we've gone through and we've thought about and referenced Appendix H, and we said, okay, does this, which of the 6 programs can this strategy be funded by? And so we've marked an X where we see it could possibly be funded by those different programs. Next slide. So this is really where you can see braiding and blending coming to life in the budget tabs. So again, as we mentioned, it's really important to understand that letter and number combo of the outcome and strategy, because as you can see on the budget tabs, in the left-hand column, you're going to indicate which outcome letter and strategy number your activity is related to. And we've built in conditional formatting into the template so that cells are highlighted in light blue of the programs that you can select from that you've already indicated on the planning tab, where you can populate the information and braid and blend funds in the budget tab. I want to be clear that 2 things need to be noted as you're indicating the outcome and strategy letter combo. Those cells will highlight. You're not required to fund it by all of the programs that you had indicated. In fact, what you need to do is really look at the activity level, double check with Appendix H, make sure at the activity level that is still allowable to be funded under the different programs you had selected on the planning tab, and then make your choice of whether you would like to fund it through all the possible programs, whether you'd like to fund it through some of them, not all, or whether you may still select one program to fund that activity. For example, we have that in the case of line 17, there's a CTE related activity and is fully funded through CTE. A helpful tool when filling out the budget tabs is going to be the codes tab. As you can see, the columns headings next to the activities, we have several codes. And the codes tab will let you know what the different categories are, give you a description, and help you when you're filling out the codes. In the integrated planning and budget template, the columns on the top that are in green contain links that will link you directly to the codes tab and let you know exactly where you need to be orienting. So let's say I have a funded partnership within the activity that I am advancing at my district, but I want to know which category I need to select under partnership. I can select the cell in the green and click on the link, and it will take me directly to the codes tab and show me the descriptions of each of the different partnerships there. That's going to be really helpful as I'm going out and filling out the budget tabs. Next slide. Tiered planning. So getting into what Bria had mentioned and described to us, this is where we're going to put some of those bonus activities or alternative activities so that they can later easily be moved into our primary plan if needed. But here I want to highlight some creative ways, some additional creative ways we can think about tiered planning. One of the ways is really thinking about how your outcome and strategy interact and communicate with one another. So for example, in this sample, strategy A1, reduce class size for math at the middle school level to ensure students remain on track to graduate from high school, aligns with outcome A, increase graduation rates for students navigating poverty from 73.5% to 84.7% by 2028. The major question here between the outcome and strategies, how can we continue to ensure students remain on track to graduate through math? So we can creatively develop an activity to address the major question. So if we look at row 7, math-focused staff for after-school math tutoring, we see that we're still able to advance towards the outcome of increased graduation rates via math, even though we're not specifically reducing math class size. Another way to creatively think about tiered planning is to take a look at the 4-year integrated plan that you're developing. So while in this template, you're executing your plan for just 2 of the 4 years, you've already planned out 4 years. And so there may be some strategies or activities within your years 3 and 4 that you could pull into tiered planning and could be easily moved into years 1 and 2 and utilized earlier if needed. When we move into the budget section on the tiered planning tab, you'll note that on the sample, there are a few X's marked on there, and that's because you have the option of indicating which funding sources you might use without specifying the specific dollar amount, though you are still able to specify the specific dollar amount if you choose to do so. And while the tiered planning makes it easier to go through the plan change process, we do ask that you still have a touch base with ODE and your district grant manager as you would like to move those into your main plan in years 1 and 2. I will pass it off to Karen.
All right, so before we head on into our questions section, we want to reiterate some of the resources that we have provided here today. So we've got our sample budget, which is modeled after one of those mid-sized schools. Appendix H in our integrated guidance goes through program by program details. Our integrated planning and budget template as well as the written guidance and a video guidance on that. So if you're more of a word learner or a video learner, we've got both of those resources for you. As well as your ESD support to reach out and talk to your ESD about helping you through this, or your regional support or district grant manager here at EII. If you have any questions about who those are, feel free to reach out to the EII inbox, or it should be on your dashboards. So before we move on to the questions, we want to open it up to you if any of you have examples from your schools about previous braiding and blending funds that you feel are good examples to share with the group to sort of give ideas how this can work going forward. So if you've got anything you want to bring on up, feel free to unmute and let us know.
I was sure you can do it.
All right, well, let's move on to the next slide and we can open it up for questions, and feel free to pop in those examples of any braiding or blending funds as we move forward as well.